teacher humiliated, a black janitor, over calculus. His answer left everyone speechless. It was fourth period on a rainy Thursday at Lincoln High School, the kind of gray afternoon where even the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead felt tired. Students slouched in their seats, half-heartedly scribbling notes or sneaking glances at the clock every 30 seconds, willing the day to end faster. Mr. Stephen Braddock, the school's notoriously sharp-tongued calculus teacher, paced at the front of the room like a restless tiger. His reputation preceded him, brilliant but biting, the kind of teacher who considered sarcasm a teaching tool and humiliation an occasional motivational tactic. The whiteboard was already covered in sprawling equations that twisted and curled like a battlefield of numbers. The classroom smelled faintly of wet jackets, eraser dust, and that old institutional scent that clung to schools built in the 60s. Phones were tucked under desks, thumbs moving stealthily. A few students half listened, the rest half dozed. In the middle row, Wes Hanley, a quiet senior who took calculus because it was expected, not because he loved it, tapped his pencil against the desk in a slow, irregular rhythm. As Mr. Braddock launched into a particularly brutal chain rule problem, a soft, rhythmic squeak drifted in from the hallway, the unmistakable sound of a mop gliding over tile. Heads turned slightly toward the door where Samuel Carter, the school's longtime janitor, moved past with slow, deliberate steps. His forest green uniform, stitched neatly with S. Carter over the chest, was damp around the cuffs from cleaning up the tracked-in rainwater. Braddock paused mid-sentence, marker still raised. His gaze flicked to the door, then back to the class. A slow, mocking smile crept onto his face. "Well, look who's gracing us with his presence," Braddock drawled, his voice carrying easily across the silent classroom. "Tell me, Mr. Carter, you think you can solve this one?" He tapped the whiteboard theatrically with the back of his marker. A few students chuckled nervously, uncertain whether it was safe to laugh. Samuel stopped in the hallway, mop upright like a soldier's staff. He met Braddock's gaze evenly, the way a man might look at a barking dog, patient, unimpressed. For a heartbeat, everyone thought he would ignore it, that he would smile politely, mumble an apology, and move on. Instead, Samuel set the mop carefully against the wall. "You mind?" he asked, his voice calm, almost gentle, as he gestured toward the board. Braddock blinked once. His smirk faltered, but he recovered quickly, giving a mock formal bow. "Be my guest." A rustle moved through the room. Phones slid out a little farther from backpacks. Carly Benson, always quick with her camera, nudged her phone up just enough to start recording. Samuel stepped into the room. The floor squeaked under his work boots. He moved without haste, picking up the dry erase marker from the tray like he had all the time in the world. His hand was steady. He studied the equation for a moment, not hesitating. Thinking, the way a carpenter might study a blueprint before picking up a hammer. "Chain rule problem," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. "But tricky, nested functions." His hand moved. No showmanship, no grand gestures. Just clean, deliberate strokes. Line after line, he wrote, pausing now and then to explain in a voice so clear and patient that even the students who usually tuned out felt themselves leaning forward. He spoke like someone who didn't just know the material but understood how to teach it, building step by step, making the impossible seem simple. "You gotta recognize the inner function first," Samuel said, underlining a portion of the equation. "Then you apply the derivative rules in layers, like peeling an onion." The only sound in the room was the soft squeak of the marker and the occasional creak of a shifting chair. Mr. Braddock stood by the desk, arms crossed tightly, his face unreadable but his jaw working. When Samuel finally capped the marker and stepped back, the board was full but organized, every step meticulously broken down. He turned to Braddock, then to the class. "That's one way to do it," he said simply. "No swagger, no gloating, just fact." For a moment, no one moved. Then Wes Hanley blurted from the front row, "Wait, he just did all that in his head?" The words broke the spell. Murmurs rippled through the room. Heads turned from the board to Samuel, back to the board again. The math was right, cleaner than most of them had ever seen. Mr. Braddock opened his mouth like he was going to retort, but no words came out. His lips pressed into a thin line. Samuel gave a small nod, polite, almost deferential, and turned to leave. He picked up his mop, leaned it back against his shoulder like a soldier shouldering a rifle, and walked back into the hallway, disappearing as quietly as he had entered. The classroom stayed silent for a few stunned seconds longer. It was Carly who broke it. "I got that on video," she whispered, wide-eyed. "Holy crap, I got all of it." By the end of the period, the video was already edited and posted to TikTok with a caption that simply read, "Our janitor just smoked our calculus teacher." By lunch, it was all anyone at Lincoln High could talk about. In the teacher's lounge, Miss Lewis from physics stopped mid-bite of her sandwich when the clip was passed around. "He didn't even pause," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "Like he's been doing calculus in his sleep." Mr. Crane, the English teacher, leaned back in his chair, frowning thoughtfully. "I've worked here 8 years. I didn't even know he had a degree." Principal Everett watched the clip in his office, his expression unreadable. He tapped his fingers against the desk once, twice, then leaned forward and replayed it, slower this time, listening carefully to Samuel's steady explanations. In the hallway, the students' energy shifted. Suddenly, Samuel wasn't invisible anymore. He was someone worth noticing. When Samuel passed by, carrying his mop and bucket, kids didn't look past him like they used to. They nodded. Some smiled awkwardly. A few gave him a shy thumbs up, like they weren't quite sure if it was allowed but needed to try anyway. By the time fourth period ended, the name Mr. Carter was on more lips than Mr. Braddock's latest homework assignment. And somewhere in the crumbling corners of Lincoln High, an old truth stirred. Respect, once overlooked, once denied, can rise up without warning. And when it does, it changes everything. Even if the man holding the mop doesn't ask for it. Especially then. By the time lunch rolled around, the clip of Samuel Carter solving the calculus problem had spread beyond just the halls of Lincoln High. It was bouncing between group chats, uploaded on TikTok, reshared on Instagram stories, even whispered about in the front office, where the secretaries tried to pretend they weren't scrolling during work hours. The caption stayed simple but devastating. "Janitor solves calculus better than the teacher." No hashtags, no edits, just the raw, shaky footage of a man who wasn't supposed to belong at the front of the classroom standing there, owning it without ever raising his voice. In the cafeteria, the energy was electric. Students clustered in tight groups around their phones, replaying the moment again and again. Each time Samuel paused thoughtfully at the board, explained a concept, and wrote with that deliberate confidence, it hit harder. "You see Braddock's face?" Wes said, laughing low as he slid into a seat across from Carly Benson and a few others. "Dude looked like he saw a ghost." Carly snorted into her soda. "He looked like he forgot how to breathe." From a table away, Leah Martinez, who usually floated under the radar, leaned over. "Do you think Mr. Carter was a teacher before?" "I heard he went to college," someone else chimed in, "like engineering or something." Rumors twisted like wildfire through the cafeteria. Samuel had been a professor. Samuel had invented something for NASA. Samuel had been a secret genius all along. No one knew the truth. But it didn't really matter. In the teacher's lounge, the mood was considerably colder. Stephen Braddock sat at the far end of the table, pretending to grade papers. He kept his head down, jaw tight, pretending not to hear the murmured conversations swirling around him. "He just walked up and solved it," Miss Lewis said, wide-eyed. "Flawlessly," added Mr. Crane, drumming his fingers thoughtfully. Principal Everett entered, mug in hand, and the room fell awkwardly silent. He didn't acknowledge the tension. Instead, he crossed directly to Braddock and set down a printout of an email. Braddock glanced at it. A parent had written in, not complaining about grades, not asking for a syllabus. Congratulating the school, congratulating Samuel Carter. "I just wanted you to see it," Everett said in a neutral tone. "The community's paying attention." Braddock said nothing. His hand tightened around his pen until the knuckles turned white. Back in the hallways, things had shifted. When Samuel pushed his mop bucket down the corridor, students moved aside with quiet respect. Some even nodded at him, awkward but genuine. He didn't ask for it. He didn't revel in it. He barely seemed to notice. But it was impossible to ignore how different the air felt now. In third period, Wes found himself staring at the empty whiteboard before Braddock entered. The class was subdued, almost reverent. Braddock taught, but the edge was gone. No sarcastic jabs, no pointed call-outs. He stuck strictly to the lesson, voice mechanical. It was as if the power he once wielded so effortlessly had drained out of him, leaving only the shell. When the bell rang, no one rushed the door. They filtered out quietly, tossing glances at one another like something huge was looming just out of sight. Outside, near the maintenance closet, a small crowd had gathered. Carly, Wes, Leah, and a few others hovered uncertainly near the open door, where Samuel was stacking a fresh set of paper towel rolls. They weren't sure what they were expecting. Maybe a speech, maybe a smile, maybe nothing. "Mr. Carter," Carly finally said, voice tentative. "That was really amazing." "What you did? In class?" Samuel turned, wiping his hands on a rag. His face was unreadable for a moment, then softened. "Appreciate that," he said simply. "You used the chain rule," Wes added, shuffling his feet. "Like perfectly." "Braddock teaches it, but I don't know. You made it make sense." Samuel smiled a little, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sometimes," he said, "it's not about knowing more. It's about seeing clearer." They stood there, awkward, the buzz of students flowing around them. Finally, Leah blurted, "Will you teach us more?" Samuel paused. The hallway noise faded into a low hum. He looked at them, really looked, and something in his chest shifted, almost painfully. "I'm not a teacher," he said after a moment. "Not anymore." "But you could be," Carly said quietly. Their faces were earnest, hopeful. Samuel hesitated, feeling old instincts stirring in the bones he thought he had buried a long time ago. "Tell you what," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "If you're serious, you find a time. I'll show you what I know." Their faces lit up like Christmas lights. As they scattered, already planning, Samuel stood alone for a moment longer, listening to the sound of their voices fade down the hallway. He turned back into the closet, the smell of disinfectant and floor wax sharp in his nose, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something other than resignation pressing against his ribs. Possibility. Down the hall, Braddock passed by, catching the tail end of the scene. He saw the way the kids clustered around Samuel like gravity itself had shifted. He saw the way Samuel carried himself now, not with arrogance, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had nothing left to prove. Braddock's mouth twisted. He wasn't used to being second best, especially not to a man with a mop. He kept walking, fists tight at his sides, his mind already churning with ways to reclaim the space he thought belonged to him. But deep down, even he knew, something fundamental had changed, and there was no walking it back. Not now. Not ever. The next morning at Lincoln High started differently. It wasn't just the usual shuffle of half-awake students dragging their backpacks through the halls. It was something electric, something almost reverent. As Samuel Carter pushed his supply cart through the east wing, heads turned. A few students nodded respectfully. Others just watched, pretending not to. Word had traveled fast, faster than anyone expected. And not just among the kids. In the main office, Principal Everett tapped his fingers against his desk, scrolling through an endless chain of emails. Parents, alumni, even a couple of local news outlets had reached out, curious about the viral story of the brilliant janitor who had humbled a teacher without even raising his voice. Across from him, Vice Principal Sharon Ellis adjusted her glasses. "You think we should make a statement?" she asked carefully. Everett shook his head. "No grandstanding. We let the story speak for itself." "But the board will want answers," Ellis added, lowering her voice, "especially if it keeps growing." Everett sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. He hadn't missed the undercurrent in some of those emails. The celebration of Samuel's talent was real, but so were the uncomfortable questions lurking underneath. Why was a man that smart pushing a mop? What had the school missed? Down the hall, inside room 204, Mr. Braddock stood at the whiteboard, face drawn tight. He knew the class was watching him more closely today. The usual casual disrespect had shifted into something more dangerous: scrutiny. When he called on students, they answered carefully, glancing toward the door as if expecting Samuel Carter to walk by and correct their teacher again. It gnawed at Braddock, made every sentence feel heavier, every glance feel sharper. He kept his voice clipped, mechanical, refusing to acknowledge the elephant in the room. But denial could only carry him so far. Meanwhile, in the back stairwell, Wes Hanley and Carly Benson were huddled with a handful of other students. "He said we could find a time," Wes was saying, excitement in his voice. "What if we set up something after school, like, officially?" "Would they let us?" Leah Martinez asked doubtfully. "I mean, he's not a teacher." "So what?" Carly shot back. "We learn more from him in 5 minutes than Braddock in a whole week." It wasn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was something bigger. It was recognition. Across town, at a small diner where teachers sometimes grabbed lunch, a conversation was happening between two old acquaintances. Miss Lewis from Lincoln High and Daniel Curran, a reporter for the Elkhart Herald. Lewis stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "If you're looking for a real story," she said, lowering her voice, "there's a man at Lincoln who deserves a hell of a lot more than a broom." Curran leaned in, interested. "Go on." Back at the school, Samuel finished fixing a broken locker hinge in the sophomore hallway. As he stood, brushing dust from his hands, he found Wes waiting for him, practically bouncing with nervous energy. "Mr. Carter," Wes said, thrusting a sheet of paper toward him. We made a schedule." Samuel raised an eyebrow, taking the paper. It was a simple grid. After-school time slots, student names scribbled in neat rows. 1 hour a week, Wes said, rushing to fill the silence. "Just whoever wants help, no pressure. We can meet in the library. Or the cafeteria, wherever." Samuel studied the paper for a long moment. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly. Wes nodded hard. "Yeah, we want to learn." "From you." Samuel exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the request settle onto his shoulders. He hadn't asked for this. had spent years avoiding anything that resembled it. But now, standing here in the fluorescent-lit hallway, facing a kid who genuinely believed he could be more, Samuel realized something. Maybe hiding wasn't protecting him anymore. Maybe it was just robbing them. He folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his pocket. "I'll be there," he said simply. The smile that broke across Wes's face could have lit up the entire school. But not everyone was celebrating. In the teacher's lounge later that afternoon, Braddock sat stiffly as murmured conversations circled around him like vultures. "I heard they want Carter to run some tutoring thing after school," Miss Lewis said casually. "Good for him, Mr. Crane added, not bothering to lower his voice. Braddock said nothing, but his hand tightened around his coffee cup until the thin plastic creaked. He had spent years building his reputation, climbing the unspoken social ladder of Lincoln High, where seniority and perception meant everything. And now, overnight, a janitor, no, a black janitor, had shifted the entire hierarchy with nothing but a marker and his mind. It wasn't fair. Braddock told himself that over and over. He deserved the respect. He had the degree. He had the title. But deep down, in places he didn't dare examine too closely, he knew. Respect wasn't demanded. It was earned. And in front of the whole school, Samuel Carter had earned it without even trying. That night, Samuel sat at his kitchen table, staring at the crumpled tutoring schedule the students had given him. Beside it sat an old, battered textbook, one he hadn't opened in years. His hand hovered over it for a long moment before flipping it open. The smell of old paper hit him like a memory. He scanned the pages, the formulas leaping off the paper like old friends. It came back easier than he expected. The chain rule. Limits. Integration by parts. All still there, tucked away in the corners of his mind, waiting. He didn't have a degree hanging on his wall. Didn't have letters behind his name anymore, but he had something stronger. Knowledge. Experience. And maybe, just maybe, the chance to pass it on. As he closed the book and leaned back, a slow smile crept across Samuel's face. Not a smile of pride, a smile of purpose. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't just cleaning up after other people's futures. He was helping build them. Outside, a late autumn wind rattled the window pane. Change was coming. Real change. And this time, Samuel Carter wasn't going to mop it away. He was going to stand in it. And let it carry him forward. The air shifted at Lincoln High, almost like the school itself was holding its breath. By Tuesday afternoon, a new sign hung outside the library. After-school math help, open to all students. No flashy designs, no loud announcements. Just plain white paper, taped up carefully by Principal Everett himself. Inside, Samuel Carter stood by one of the study tables, a dry erase board on wheels behind him, a handful of battered textbooks stacked neatly at his side. His forest green custodial uniform looked almost out of place now, a strange badge of humility in a space suddenly thick with expectation. The first students to trickle in came hesitantly, heads down, gripping their notebooks a little too tightly. Then came more. Wes Hanley. Carly Benson, Leah Martinez. Even a few faces Samuel didn't recognize, freshmen and sophomores, words spreading faster than any official announcement could. Samuel greeted each one with a nod, not towering over them like an authority figure, but sitting down at the same tables, leveling the ground between them. "All right," he said, voice steady. "Who wants to start?" For a few seconds, no one moved. Then Carly slid a notebook across the table, her face flushed. "Could you show us how you broke down that derivative the other day? The way you explained it made more sense than, you know." Samuel smiled faintly. "Sure thing." He picked up a marker and began writing on the portable whiteboard, slow and deliberate. Chain rule, inner function, outer derivative. Each step drawn out not like a lecture, but like a conversation, with Samuel pausing to ask them what they saw before he explained what he knew. At first, the kids were cautious, unsure. But as he worked through the problem, connecting the math to real-world examples, gears turning inside a motor, the velocity of a baseball, something clicked. They leaned in. They asked questions. And Samuel answered each one without judgment, treating every stumble not as failure, but as another step forward. It wasn't just tutoring. It was transformation. Across the hall, Braddock watched from the doorway. He didn't step inside. Didn't say a word. But the tightness in his jaw, the rigid way he held his clipboard, betrayed everything he refused to admit even to himself. Because for the first time in his career, he wasn't the smartest man in the room. And worse, he realized he had never even tried to be the kind of teacher Samuel Carter was, without a single credential to his name. Meanwhile, the students inside weren't thinking about titles or degrees. They were thinking about possibility, about how knowledge could feel like something you could hold in your hands, not something designed to keep you out. When the session ended and the students gathered their things, Wes stayed behind a moment, lingering awkwardly. "You know," he said, shuffling his feet, you could probably teach here. Like, for real." Samuel chuckled under his breath. "Not sure the school board's ready for that," he said gently. But Wes didn't laugh. He stared at Samuel with a quiet, stubborn certainty. "Maybe they're not," he said, "but we are." As the boy walked away, Samuel stood there for a long moment, the marker still in his hand, the whiteboard filled with patient, careful handwriting. Something stirred deep in his chest. A memory. A dream he had packed away so long ago it had started to feel like someone else's life. Across town that evening, Daniel Curran, the reporter from the Elkhart Herald, sat at his desk, combing through public records. Transcripts from Purdue. A record of Lamar Carter, Samuel's name before he'd legally changed it years ago to escape certain burdens, sitting among the top 2% of engineering students before disappearing mid-sophomore year. No scandal. No academic failure. Just gone. Curran's fingers hovered over his keyboard. There was a story here, not the tabloid trash he could sell in a heartbeat. A real story. A story about lost potential, invisible labor, and the quiet brilliance that systems love to overlook. At Lincoln High, the tides continued to shift. Principal Everett called a private meeting with Vice Principal Ellis and a few senior staff members. "It's time we consider," Everett said, weighing each word carefully, "a way to make Mr. Carter's sessions official." Ellis frowned slightly. "Without stirring backlash?" Everett nodded grimly. "Without giving certain people a reason to sabotage it." They all knew who he meant without saying it aloud. Braddock. Not just Braddock, but others too. Teachers who saw Samuel's rise as a threat instead of a victory. The old guard. The ones who still clutched tightly to their sense of hierarchy, mistaking it for respect. The plan was simple. Formalize Samuel's after-school program as an enrichment initiative, independent from standard curriculum. Volunteer-based, opt-in only. Enough to protect Samuel from bureaucratic sabotage, but not so official it would draw fire from the wrong places. It was, as Everett called it, a bridge. A bridge Samuel would have to decide whether he wanted to cross. Later that night, Samuel sat on the stoop of his modest apartment, a battered copy of an old calculus textbook open on his knees. He wasn't studying, not really. He was remembering. The nights he spent at Purdue, scribbling notes under flickering fluorescent lights, fueled by cheap coffee and the stubborn belief that he could outrun everything stacked against him. His mother's voice echoed in his head. "You were born knowing how to build things, baby," she used to say. "Now build something they can't tear down." He closed the book gently, and for the first time in a long, long while, he allowed himself to think about building again. Not for himself, for them, for the kids who deserve better. The next morning, Samuel walked into the school a little earlier than usual. The halls were still half dark, the hum of fluorescent lights just kicking to life. He found Principal Everett already waiting by the front office, a quiet, unreadable expression on his face. "I have a proposal," Everett said simply, handing him a manila folder. Samuel took it, opened it, read the first few lines. And for a brief moment, he felt like the floor beneath him wasn't entirely solid. It wasn't a job offer. Not yet, but it was a chance, a bridge. He looked up, meeting Everett's eyes. "You're serious about this?" Samuel asked. Everett nodded once. "Dead serious." Samuel closed the folder slowly, tucking it under his arm. "Let me think about it," he said. Everett smiled faintly. "Take your time, but not too long. The kids are already way ahead of us." As Samuel walked down the hall toward the janitor's closet, his closet, he passed room 204. The door was cracked open. Inside, Braddock stood alone at the whiteboard, erasing equations from yesterday's lesson with sharp, angry strokes. Their eyes met briefly. Braddock looked away first. And Samuel realized, with a clarity that hit like a thunderclap, he didn't need Braddock's approval. He didn't need anyone's permission anymore. The only thing standing between him and his future was the choice to step through the door. And this time, Samuel Carter intended to walk through it, wide open, on his own terms. By Wednesday, the video had crossed state lines. What started as a shaky 10-second clip filmed by Carly on her phone now lived on education forums, Twitter threads, and Facebook groups full of teachers, parents, and alumni who had never stepped foot in Lincoln High. It showed Samuel Carter, janitor, 49, quiet, invisible, walking to the front of the room with a marker in hand. The frame shook slightly as he worked out the chain rule problem in 3 clear steps. The camera didn't catch Mr. Braddock's face, but the silence after Samuel finished was louder than any reaction. It had gone viral for all the right reasons. No profanity, no drama, no screaming. Just quiet excellence, delivered by a man everyone had overlooked. And now, everyone wanted to know who Samuel Carter was. Back at Lincoln High, Samuel didn't know any of this. His flip phone didn't even have a browser. What he did know was that the kids were coming back, more each day, some bringing friends. The back corner of the library transformed into a buzz of notebooks and questions, of laughter over missed steps and small victories when things clicked. They started calling it Carter's Corner. It wasn't official, but it was growing. Principal Everett met with the school board that morning. Their tone was mixed. "People love the story," said Trina Walters, the board liaison. "But we're getting calls, some concerned parents. They want to know why a custodian is teaching math." Everett raised an eyebrow. "He's not teaching in a formal class. He's helping students after hours, voluntarily. With my full support." Another board member, Mr. Carlson, leaned forward. "Be honest. How long can we let this go before we need to call it what it is?" "What's that?" Everett asked. "A disruption," Carlson said, "to the hierarchy. The union, the system. He's not certified." "But he's qualified," Everett snapped. "More qualified than some of the staff I've had to defend over the years." A hush fell over the room. Everett didn't back down. "If we want to keep talking about equity, maybe it's time we stop being afraid of what it looks like when it walks in without a title." That night, as Samuel locked up the last hallway, he passed Braddock in the teacher's lounge. For the first time in days, the math teacher didn't look away. He was sitting stiffly at the edge of a chair, arms crossed, watching the news loop silently on the TV mounted to the wall. The footage playing was unmistakable, Samuel's steady hand on the marker, the room falling quiet behind him. "You see this?" Braddock muttered without looking up. Samuel paused in the doorway. "I've heard." Braddock's jaw twitched. "You embarrassed me." Samuel said nothing. Braddock stood, slow and deliberate, walking toward him. "You made me look like a fool in front of those kids." "I didn't plan that," Samuel replied. "You asked a question. I answered it." Braddock shook his head. "You don't get it, do you?" Teaching isn't about solving problems. It's about being the authority, the model. Samuel met his gaze evenly. Then maybe the model needs fixing. The room froze in that sentence. Braddock's face colored, but he said nothing more. He turned away, picked up his papers, and left the room in silence. The next day, the local paper ran a front-page story. "When the janitor solves the problem, a lesson in respect." It wasn't sensational, but it stung the people who felt their positions were threatened. Anonymous messages started hitting the district inbox, questioning Samuel's background, wondering aloud if he had lied about who he was. Someone even implied he was a danger to students, without evidence. It was baseless, but it created enough noise for a meeting to be called. Samuel was asked to attend, along with Principal Everett and the district HR rep. The room was cool, too quiet. Across the table, a woman from the legal office flipped through a folder that looked far too thick for the subject at hand. "We've received inquiries," she began, "regarding your credentials, your activities on school grounds, and your role with students outside your formal job description." Samuel stayed calm. "I've only ever helped students who asked for it. I've never crossed a line." "We're not accusing you of misconduct," she said quickly. "But when something grows like this, when a video goes viral, when national attention is involved, it becomes something else, a liability." Everett leaned in. "He's not the liability. He's the reason half our students are showing up early and staying late." "We understand that," the woman replied, "which is why we're here to offer a compromise." She slid a document across the table. "We'd like to create a formal tutoring position, part-time, limited hours. You'll be on record as educational support, working under the math department. We'll fund it through a grant. You'll need to complete a basic certification course, just a formality, and stop using the library until it's approved." Samuel looked down at the paper. It was clean, professional, but it wasn't an opportunity. It was containment. "You want to make me small again," he said quietly. "Put me back in a box where you can control the narrative." "No," she said, almost too quickly. "We want to protect you." He pushed the paper back across the table. "I don't want a title," he said. "I want trust. If I haven't earned that, we have nothing to talk about." And he walked out. That night, Carly posted a second video. It wasn't flashy. Just a clip of Samuel helping a student in the library, her voice overlaying softly. "He never asked for attention. He just showed us we were worth showing up for." The video exploded. Again. This time, alumni started commenting. Then former teachers. Then a professor from Purdue, who recognized Samuel from a decade-old photo and said he remembered one of the brightest students I ever taught. Then came the emails. To the district. To Everett. To the board. Dozens. Then hundreds. Parents demanding Samuel be recognized, not for clout, but for character. And finally, one message changed everything. It was from the superintendent's office. "We need to talk about how to elevate Mr. Carter's role." Quietly, but meaningfully. Back at Lincoln High, Samuel didn't celebrate. He cleaned up spilled juice in the cafeteria, fixed a loose faucet in the boys' bathroom, and at 4:05 he was back in the library, 3 students waiting patiently. "Let's get started," he said. As if the world hadn't just shifted again. As if he was exactly where he needed to be. Because he was. By the following Monday, Samuel Carter's name was being whispered in places he never imagined, inside boardrooms, teacher lounges, and Zoom calls hosted by education nonprofits. Still, inside the walls of Lincoln High, he kept to his routine. Mop bucket. Key ring. Quiet footsteps in the hallway, but something unspoken had shifted. Respect no longer trailed behind him like a whisper. It preceded him like a presence. But not everyone welcomed that change. In the faculty lounge, Mr. Braddock sat at the corner table with his untouched coffee cooling beside his lesson planner. He had grown quieter in recent days, the sharpness in his tone worn down to something brittle. Teachers offered smiles, polite nods, but no one stayed in conversation with him long. And that gnawed at him. He wasn't used to being ignored. What bothered Braddock most wasn't the math problem Samuel had solved. It wasn't even the viral attention. It was how his own students now looked at someone else like he was the example, as if years of lectures, degrees, and tenure could be outshined by a man with a mop. At the same time, Samuel was facing a different kind of pressure, one he never asked for. 3 students waited for him outside the maintenance office before lunch. One clutched a calculus worksheet. Another held her phone up with a TikTok comment that read, "Mr. Carter is the real teacher now." He shook his head. "I'm not a teacher," he said softly. "I'm just helping out where I can." "But you are," said Olivia, a senior who once hated math. "Maybe not by title, but you are." That night, Samuel stayed late to repair a broken water line in the East Wing. When he finished, sweat on his brow, he sat outside near the loading dock and pulled out a wrinkled envelope from his jacket pocket. It was from Purdue. A letter he never opened. One of the last they'd sent before he officially dropped out. For the first time, he tore it open. Inside, the words were plain. A reminder that he could reapply, that they would hold his credits for 3 more semesters, that someone had noticed his absence and left the door cracked open. He stared at it, long and quiet. That same night, Principal Everett was called into an emergency district meeting. Not about Samuel directly. But indirectly? Absolutely. 2 other schools had asked if they could model similar mentorship corners like Carter's. The state superintendent had taken interest in the story. And donors were reaching out, asking how they could support academic programs led by support staff with real experience. But the problem was political now. "Are we prepared to validate someone who hasn't finished their degree?" one board member asked. "What precedent does that set?" "What precedent have we already set?" Everett fired back, "by pretending only paper proves worth." The room went quiet. Back at Lincoln, the math department had called a closed-door meeting. Braddock sat at the head of the table. "It's out of hand," he said. "We have students missing after-school appointments because they're lining up to meet with Carter." "That's not structure. It's chaos." Miss Alvarez, the youngest teacher in the department, spoke gently. "Or maybe it's because he makes them believe they're capable." Braddock frowned. "He hasn't earned that position." She didn't flinch. "Maybe he earned it the day you challenged him in front of the class. And he handled it with more grace than most would." Later that week, Everett pulled Samuel aside after hours. "I need to ask you something," the principal said. "Have you thought about applying for a para-educator role, something that would let us officially get you in front of more students?" Samuel sighed. "I never meant for any of this." I just saw a problem. I tried to help. I know, and that's what makes it worth building on. Samuel looked away, down the empty hallway. I've lived a long time believing I'd missed my chance, he said. And now everyone's telling me I'm right on time. It's a strange thing. Everett placed a hand on his shoulder. You were never late, just unseen. On Friday, Braddock walked into the library during one of the tutoring sessions. Students noticed immediately, quieting down. Samuel glanced up, surprised. I'd like to observe, Braddock said. Samuel nodded once. You're welcome to. Braddock sat in silence for 20 minutes. He watched as Samuel guided students not just through answers, but through self-doubt. He watched as Olivia smiled when she finally understood limits, as David asked a question instead of pretending to know the answer. And something cracked in Braddock. Not shame, not pride. Something more painful. Recognition. After the session ended, as Samuel packed up his notes, Braddock stayed behind. I watched that clip again, he said, quietly. The video. I wasn't proud of how I came off. Samuel didn't gloat, didn't shrug. Just waited. I didn't see you, Braddock admitted. And that's my failure. Samuel nodded slowly. We all miss things when we stop looking. Braddock glanced at the whiteboard, where the problem still lingered in faded marker. You think there's room for both of us to teach here? Samuel smiled just slightly. If there's room for the kids to learn, there's room for us to grow. That night, as the last bell echoed through empty halls, the janitor and the teacher walked side by side. Not equals by paper, but maybe finally equals in purpose. The local newspaper ran the headline on Sunday, Janitor's Calculus Skills Spark Educational Movement at Lincoln High. The article was short, understated, but it hit like a pulse through the city. Monday morning, parents were emailing the school, asking how their kids could get into Samuel Carter's sessions. College counselors reached out to Everett, wondering if Carter would be interested in leading SAT prep. Someone even suggested inviting him to speak at a district-wide professional development day. But Samuel hadn't changed, at least not in the way people expected. He still clocked in before sunrise, still checked every faucet and hallway light before the first bell rang. He still swept the auditorium after assemblies and tightened the bolts on cafeteria table legs, but something had shifted inside him, a quiet fire he hadn't felt since Purdue. And that fire was about to be tested. That afternoon, Everett called him into his office again, this time with someone waiting. Dr. Kayla Chen, head of curriculum innovation at the State Education Board. She was in her early 40s, sharp suit, sharper eyes. She greeted Samuel like an old friend, though they'd never met. You've made quite an impression, Mr. Carter, she said. Samuel nodded slowly. Didn't mean to. That's usually how the good ones start, she said, pulling out a folder. We'd like to invite you to co-develop a new mentorship model, starting with Lincoln High. Something we can scale statewide. Small group tutoring led by experienced professionals, even if they're not licensed teachers. Samuel blinked. You want me to build a program? With your input. Your structure. Your name on it. He looked to Everett, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. But Samuel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood, walked to the window, and stared at the football field being repainted in the distance. I gave up a long time ago on being part of something official, he said quietly. It didn't seem like the world was looking for what I had to offer. Doctor. Chen stepped forward. That's why we're looking now, because we need more than just policy. We need proof that what works isn't always what's traditional. Samuel turned back. You're sure the board is ready for that kind of shift? She smiled. Let's give them no choice. The rest of the week flew by. Students poured into the library after school, not just from Lincoln High, but from 2 nearby schools where word had spread. Some parents even showed up, asking for copies of his worksheets. Samuel stayed late every night, printing resources, redrafting concepts, sketching out ways to explain integrals with metaphors about building motors and fixing pipes. On Thursday, Olivia pulled him aside after a session. "Mr. Carter," she said, "someone from Stanford reposted your video. Their math department account." Samuel blinked. Stanford? They added a caption. Talent lives everywhere. Recognition doesn't. He didn't know what to say. She smiled. Just thought you'd want to know. But not everyone welcomed the momentum. On Friday, an anonymous letter showed up at the district office. It was typed. Cold. It questioned Samuel's lack of formal credentials, cited possible liability, even suggested he was taking attention away from licensed faculty. Everett showed it to him without a word. "You think it was Braddock?" Samuel asked. Everett sighed. "I don't know. I hope not. But it doesn't really matter who. The real question is, do you still want to keep going?" Samuel folded the letter carefully, then dropped it into the recycling bin beside Everett's desk. "If a piece of paper scared me off," he said, "I'd never have made it through my first job interview." That same day, Braddock walked into the library just before the final bell. The students noticed. So did Samuel. Braddock didn't sit. He just waited until the last student filtered out, then stepped forward. "I didn't write that letter," he said. Samuel studied him. "But did you want to?" Braddock hesitated. "Maybe, a few weeks ago? I don't know." "I was angry and embarrassed." Samuel nodded. "Truth is, I was too." Braddock exhaled, shoulders loosening slightly. "You've got a gift, Carter. I see that now. And maybe this school needed a shake." Samuel walked over to the board, still smudged with the day's equations. He picked up the eraser and began wiping it clean. "You ever think," he said, "that the reason the system feels broken is because it wasn't designed to see all of us?" Braddock didn't answer. He didn't have to. That weekend, Samuel finally sat down with his niece, Camille, for dinner. She was in her first year of college, studying computer science. Over grilled chicken and mashed potatoes, she asked the question he hadn't prepared for. "Uncle Sam," she said, "you ever think about going back?" "To school?" She nodded. "You've got the fire again. I can see it." "You're not just helping kids. You're building something." He took a long sip of water. "I don't need a degree to teach them." "I know. But maybe you need it for you." That night he opened his laptop for the first time in months. He searched Purdue's continuing education portal, logged in with an email address he hadn't used in over a decade. His old student ID still worked. The screen blinked. "Welcome back, Samuel." As the cursor hovered over the Apply Now button, he thought about everything. The chalk, the mop, the students. The moment Braddock handed him respect without needing to say the word. Then he clicked. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was just answering a question the world had finally learned how to ask. The school buzzed with anticipation. By the time April rolled around, the district had announced its first-ever Community Impact Awards, and to no one's surprise, except maybe his own, Samuel Carter was named one of the honorees. It wasn't a glossy ceremony, no red carpets or camera crews, just folding chairs set up in the gym, a small stage, and a line of names read out by Principal Everett as families clapped from the bleachers. Samuel didn't want to go. He told Everett as much the week before, standing awkwardly outside the maintenance room. But Everett just smiled. You don't have to make a speech. Just show up. That's what got you here in the first place. So Samuel showed up. He wore his cleanest button-down, navy blue with sleeves that still smelled faintly of detergent. The students he'd tutored, Olivia, Wes, Dev, Maya, all sat together in the third row. When Everett called his name, the clapping started slow, then swelled into something louder. Real, not for a viral moment, not for shock, but for change. As Samuel stepped onto the stage, he paused at the microphone. He didn't plan to say anything. He never did, but the silence felt expectant, not heavy. So he leaned in, voice even. Most people never plan to be seen, especially not the quiet ones. He looked down at his hands, calloused from years of fixing what others ignored. I didn't come here expecting to teach. I came here to clean, but sometimes the world hands you a moment, and all you can do is show up for it. He glanced at the students. I've seen what happens when someone listens, when someone believes, and I've learned that you don't have to stand at the front of a classroom to make someone feel capable. He nodded once. That's all I ever wanted, to make someone feel capable. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, but it lingered. It held weight. After the event, Samuel stood near the gym doors, shaking hands with parents, smiling at teachers who still seemed surprised by who he'd become. Braddock approached last. He held out an envelope. "What's this?" Samuel asked. Braddock shrugged, uncharacteristically sheepish. "It's a letter of recommendation for the Purdue reapplication. Thought you might need one from a licensed educator." Samuel blinked, then laughed quietly. "I never expected that from you." "I never expected to be taught by a janitor," Braddock replied. "But here we are." A few weeks later, Samuel was sitting on the floor of the library during another after-school session. This time there were 9 students, the smallest group yet, but somehow it felt like the most important. Olivia was helping a freshman with graphing functions. Dev was working through an SAT prep book. Samuel wasn't leading. He was watching, letting them take the reins. And that, to him, was the twist no one saw coming. This wasn't just about him anymore. It never was. It was about giving students tools they weren't supposed to have until someone told them they could. Later that evening, he walked past the old whiteboard in room 214, the same one he'd stepped in front of on that Thursday afternoon when Braddock had first challenged him. The classroom was empty now, lights dimmed. He stepped inside, just for a moment. He stood where he'd stood before, looked at the board, the marker tray, the smudge in the lower left corner that never really got clean. Then he turned and walked out. No need to rewrite the moment. He'd already changed what it meant. By June, the district officially launched the Carter Model, a mentorship-based supplemental learning program pairing staff from non-academic roles with students across various schools. Samuel's name was on every slide, every brochure. Still, he kept showing up at Lincoln High, still fixed the faucets, still swept the halls. He told Everett he wanted to finish the year like he started it, quiet, present, whole. The final bell of the school year rang on a warm afternoon. The hallways erupted in chatter, lockers slammed, footsteps echoed like fireworks. Samuel leaned against his mop handle, watching the tide roll past. A group of students passed by and called out, "See you next year, Mr. C." He raised a hand in reply. Smiling. That night, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, Samuel walked the long way home. Past the corner store. Past the park. Past the empty basketball courts where his mother used to tell him, "Keep your eyes ahead, even when the world looks past you." He stopped at the community mailbox on his block, opened his slot. Inside was a single envelope. Return address, Purdue University. He didn't open it on the spot. Didn't need to, because whatever it said, accepted or not, he had already arrived. He had already built something that couldn't be graded. Couldn't be revoked. Legacy, and that's the story. If it moved you, if it reminded you of someone who changed your life in a quiet way, share this. Remember that the people we overlook are often the ones holding us up. Sometimes the janitor knows the answer. Sometimes he teaches us how to solve the problem without ever needing to raise his voice.